Okay.
For those of you that didn't hear that, Cheryl is with us. Cheryl is our ex-COVID patient. And look at her. She's up in our upper left. I hope that's where she is for you. It is so good to see you.
And I do tell people, Cheryl, that one part of the commercial is if you end up being hospitalized, demand, and I mean demand plasma. So, because she got better almost immediately when she got it. So, and that's after 30 days of being hospitalized. We are excited today. We are back to David. And today we're going to start at 2 David 2, verse 17. And we're going to hope to get to the end of 4. We'll see how that goes, maybe the beginning of 5. But we're going to look at, there's a lot of a lot of killing going on in these passages. And Scott, as usual, has done a lot of looking at the words, and that's why that midweek was sent out. Do you want to address the midweek just real quick? Just the fact you're gonna do it?
Yeah, if you didn't listen to it, the big thing, I may have misspoken a little bit when I talked about that word. It's not a Bible word, but the point I'm trying to get across is that what a word means today can mislead us. It's always important to understand what did it mean when it was written. And there are times that it makes all the difference in the world in what we get out of these lessons. So that's what that was about.
So we left off, where did we leave off? We left off last week with Abner, who with 2 commanders of the military. On Saul's side, Saul is dead, but Abner is the head, has been Saul's head of the military on one side, and Joab, who is David's nephew, is the head of the military on the other side. So and Abner was Saul's cousin. So there's 2 important things to remember here. First of all, it's Jew versus Jew, not supposed to happen, guys. Second of all, the head of the military is a very, very important position, and both sides have put a close relative into that position. So where we left off last time is Abner and Ishbosheth, who was Saul's son, left their area because the Philistines were winning it over. They went to the other side of the Jordan, which they weren't supposed to be over there in the first place. But anyhow, they have settled on the other side of the Jordan. And David is down in Hebron with Joab. Joab goes up and he's at a pool. Abner goes over, he's at a pool. They're all at a pool because that's where you get water. And Abner says, hey, let's do a fight. And he says, good idea. Let's get 12 people on both sides. So Abner selects 12 of his men. Joab selects 12 of his men. They have what seems to me, a very stupid fight. They all get each other with the swords, and all 24 of them die. So we've got 24 young warriors dead by a pool. And that's where we left off. So we are at 2 Samuel, 2nd chapter, verse 17. The battle that day was intense, and Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by the servants of David. The 3 sons of Jeruiah were there: Joab, Ashbashai, and Ashahel. Now Ashahel was fleet of foot like a wild gazelle, and he chased Abner, not turning to the right or turning to the left in his pursuit. And Abner glanced back and said, is that you, Asahel? It is, Asahel replied. So Abner told him, turn to your right or to your left, seize one of the young men and take his equipment for yourself. But Asahel would not stop chasing him. Once again, Abner warned Asahel, stop chasing me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How can I show my face to your brother Joab? But Asahel refused to turn away. So Abner thrust the butt of his spear into his stomach, and it came out the back, and he fell dead on the spot. And every man paused when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner. By sunset, they had gone as far as the hill of Ammah, opposite Giah. on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. The Benjaminites rallied to Abner, formed a single unit, and took their stand atop a hill. Then Abner called to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Do you not realize that this will only end in bitterness? How long before you tell the troops to stop pursuing their brothers?" "So surely as God lives," Joab replied, "if you had not spoken up, the troops would have continued pursuing their brothers until morning." Joab blew the ram's horn, and all the troops stopped and no longer pursued Israel or continued to fight. And all that night, Abner and his men marched through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, marched all morning, and arrived in Mahanaim. When Joab returned from pursuing Abner, he gathered all his troops. In addition to Asahel, 19 of David's servants were missing, but they had struck down 360 Benjaminites who were with Abner. Later, they took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb in Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and reached Hebron by daybreak. Fun story.
So I think, first of all, one thing I'll just mention, the word Israel, and it gets confusing because Israel, you remember, was given to Jacob as a name. And then we talk about the nation, the country, and then we talk about the land, and they're all three called Israel. And there's a fourth meaning because the 12 tribes had divided up north and south. And the south called themselves Judah, which was primarily the tribe of Judah. And the north, all those other tribes banded together and called themselves Israel. And so sometimes it gets confusing when we're trying to figure out who's fighting who and what's going on, because Israel gets used 4 different ways. As Mary said, we closed when this ridiculous fight got proposed. What we were supposed to see is this sort of animosity between North and South, and that was an excuse to start a full-fledged battle. Judah winds up getting the upper hand in a big way. And as happens often, when one side sees that it's in trouble, they split, they run away. And their leader, Abner, he's taken off, and they all run for home and sort of get together somewhere down the road. But here's this one guy, Asahel, and it mentions how fast he is for you to understand. Joab has a head start, but Asahel's going to run him down. Abner has a head start, but Asahel's going to run him down. And what we believe is happening here, if you capture kill an important person, for one thing, like this is the warlord, you take his stuff and you parade around in it, and you're sort of a hero. And Abner's on the run, and Asahel, one of these 3 brothers, takes off after him. And Abner's trying to convince him, "I don't want to strike you down. Your brother would never forgive me." He says, turn aside, find somebody else, one of the young men, and kill them. And I think, do you not understand? He's saying, kill one of my guys and take their stuff, and at least you'll have gotten something out of this. Asahel keeps pursuing, and this spear they also referred to as a lance. In the Middle East, there was a period of time where it was common to sharpen the butt end of it. And the guy runs up behind him and he thrusts it backwards and kills him. Abner, as I have mentioned, was a tough, proven warrior. There's an old saying when I was growing up that old age and treachery will always overcome youth and skill. That's what we have here. I mean, he's tricked him into coming close enough, but he kills him. And then he continues on. Asahel's 2 brothers, one of whom is David's sort of warlord, pursue with as many men as they have with them. And the other side gets up on a hill. They all sort of get together. And now, Joab hasn't stopped to think, but he's in trouble. because he doesn't have enough guys. Abner has put all his guys together and they've got the high ground. And the other side of it is Abner knows they've lost the battle up until now. I mean, it doesn't serve him well to fight. So he yells down and he does this, how long shall the sword devour? Like, are we really going to kill each other, Jews killing Jews? Now, remember, he started this. And now he's playing this game of, how long will brother continue to fight against brother? Can't we just all get along? And I think Joab probably realizes he's in a bind. And so he breaks off the fight, goes back and collects his men. It does mention that Abner and his men went through the night to get back home. So they don't want to get caught by daylight in this territory. They're in trouble. And that's sort of where this part ends. But it's going to be important for what comes next.
Well, and do you want to address the idea there's different rules for killing? This is
Might as well do it now.
Yeah.
So when we worry about these things, we want to know,
Was this right?
the 10 Commandments has a word for thou shalt not kill, and it's different than other words for kill. And the most common understanding is the commandment is saying do not murder. There's this understanding that if you're in a battle and someone gets killed, you're not to blame. But there's this other version that is described. You can have, I mentioned last week, you're up on a ladder, you accidentally drop a hammer, somebody gets killed. Or, you might pick up an iron instrument or a rock and intentionally strike someone. So they have different words. And if someone kills another person under Jewish law, they have something called the Goel Hadam, avenger of blood. What it really is a redeemer of blood. So a kinsman then says, you killed my kinsman, I have a right to kill you. And they have it's no different than us. They have justifiable homicide. They have all of these gray areas. And so the theory here is that Asahel chasing this guy down with the intent of killing him makes Abner killing him justified. It's part of a battle. It's done in the heat of battle. There's a case to be made that because Abner started this whole thing, maybe he's not free and clear. And because Abner's running away, Asahel shouldn't have been. This is the law. And I'm going to get back to this. But here's the problem. The law is flawed. The law is, it tells us how to get along as a society, but the law is not the ultimate judge of what God wants. And I went through this week. You can't imagine how many hours I spent on this week. These words for killing. And you can't make sense of it. And the conclusion I came to is you can't make sense of it. You can try and look for a rule, and it's not there. It's always the law, and the law is always flawed.
So we're going to look at 3 killings today, and all of them, according to Jewish law, might have different nuances. But as we concluded driving back from Inez last night, I guess the one thing you can say is killing probably never gets you closer to God.
The one thing, and we've talked about it before, the idea that sin, if we define sin as that which separates you from God, you don't have to play all the legal games. And in this case, killing another person, I can't find any way that I can say that brings you closer to God. And you say, well, what about a battle? Well, the fact is, if we weren't flawed, if we weren't broken, there would be no need for those kinds of rules and laws. It's a broken world and a broken system. And so we have the law to kind of try and compensate for that, to keep us in line. But I believe, and I'm convinced, that it was never intended that we should go around killing each other. And the other thing I guess I will mention is that people go to great lengths to try and figure out, of these 3 killings we're going to get into today, which were justified and which were not. And the question that came to my mind is, why do you need to know? What will that help you? Are you planning on killing someone? Do you have something you want to know? How can I split hairs on this? Because that's how it gets used most of the time, is people go out looking for a way to beat the law. The fact is, we really don't need to be killing each other. How about that? So now let's move on. We'll come back to it.
So I'm going to have you read the first part of 2 Samuel 3 and verses 1 through 5, because there's a bunch of names that I'll kill and you can do them much better than me. Thank you.
And it starts out being important because it says, now the war between the house of Saul and the house of David was protracted. Right there, you should pay attention to the fact that this is a full-scale war between the north and the south, between Judah and the tribes calling themselves Israel. It's a war. And we were supposed to get, when those 12 men killed each other, that this is more than just a casual fight. So the war between the house of Saul and the house of David was protracted. And David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. And sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam of Jezreel. The second was Chileab by Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third was Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of King Tamai of Geshur. His fourth was Adonijah, the son of Haggith. His fifth was Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And his sixth was Ithream by David's wife, Eglah. These sons were born to David in Hebron.
So you can see why I had him read those names in the first place. But anyhow, remember, he's in Hebron for 7.5 years. We learned that already. So in 7.5 years, he had 6 sons. Doesn't say how many daughters he had. I'm sure there were some daughters along the way too. But he had 6 sons in 7.5 years by 6 women. Okay. So this is another one of those things you're like, is this right? No, it's not right.
No, and I read last week, we have from the law this prediction they would have a king, and it says the king is not supposed to take many wives like this. And what we will see, there's a little bit of a spoiler alert, is that it doesn't serve David well.
These sons come back to haunt him.
These sons come back to haunt him. Yeah, we can see part of the reason why this is not a good thing.
It was one of the sermons we listened to this week. I thought it was a good thing. An interesting thing. It says, it's like we'd like to see an additional sentence added here, and this was not right, and to make us feel all right. But anyhow, as Scott says, he read yet last week, Deuteronomy 17:17, which said,
Wow.
do not take more than one wife. So anyhow, I remember. Okay.
The thing you do remember that Abner has appointed Saul's remaining son as king of the north tribes of Israel. Abner appointed him, and Abner's really the de facto king. The son is a figurehead. And what it says is that Judah, David's area, continues to strengthen, continues to win, and Saul's son in the north continues to lose and continues to be weakened. And that's also important. And the message there was that David was the anointed and Saul's son was not. And they're not having much success.
So this next section is I don't even know where to start, how weird it is. Ishbosheth accuses Abner of sleeping with his dad's concubine. So, where does wrong start? I don't know. There's just so much wrong here. You can't. Anyhow, during the war between the houses of Saul and the house of David, Abner had continued to strengthen his position in the house of Saul. Meanwhile, Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. So Ishbosheth questioned Abner, "Why do you sleep with my father's concubine?" Abner was furious over Ishbosheth's accusation. Am I the head of a dog that belongs to Judah? He asked. All this time, I've been loyal to the house of your father Saul, to his brothers, and to his friends. I have not delivered you into the hand of David, but now you accuse me of wrongdoings with this woman. May God punish Abner and ever so severely if I do not do for David what the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish the throne of David over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba. And for fear of Abner, Ishbosheth did not dare say another word to him.
And we seem to say this a lot lately each week. There's a whole lot going on here. So Ishbosheth
was Saul's youngest son.
And he is anointed as king. And Abner's been running the show. And in this society, you notice the kings tend to have a lot of wives. And it's sort of a sign of their power, their wealth, and everything else. And they keep these concubines who are like second-tier wives. That's not a Hebrew word, but they're like second-tier wives. And even if anyone presumes to sleep with or to approach one of the wives or concubines, it's actually viewed as a threat to the king himself, an insult. And this happens several times we see through the Old Testament, but this even carries on after their death, after the death of the king. And so it appears that what Abner is doing, he can't really be the king because Saul's son has to be the king. So he's running things, and this is the way with powerful people, powerful men more maybe than women, is they've got to show how powerful they are. And it appears that he has to sort of reassure himself, I may not be the king, but I can take Saul's concubines. And it's hard to describe, but this is a big issue in that setting. And what's happened is Ishbosheth has woken up one day and decided he really is the king. He's not. He's got the name. Abner's running the show. And Ishbosheth has the audacity to challenge Abner over this. And Abner just blows a gasket. How dare you? There's that saying in there, am I a dog's head of Judah? And we listen to, as we always do, we listen to commentaries this week, and people are dissecting this. They're trying to get, did it really mean dog? Was it talking about all this? Hey, okay, so there, you remember we don't hear it much, but there's a saying people would say, go fly a kite, get out of here, go fly a kite. Well, there's a saying in Spanish, I don't know how, widespread, but there's a saying in the Spanish language that translates go fry a radish. It doesn't mean anything. It's an idiom. It's like go fly a kite. And I don't know, maybe it's just Spain because Gene's looking at me, but I remember, the point is he's saying, am I some kind of a dog that you would dare to talk to me this way? And he just blows up. Now the really interesting part. First, he confirms, I've carried you all this way. I've been looking out for your father's house. I've been looking out for you. I've been running things for you. And you did, and you think he protests a little too much? Yeah, he's getting carried away. And he says, and now I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to swear an oath. May God deal severely with me if I don't do this. He says, I'm going to do what God intended, which is to deliver the entire kingdom, all 12 tribes, to David. Okay, oops. If he knew that, and he clearly did, and he decided to put Ishbosheth in as king of the 10 northern tribes, what was he thinking? This is an admission that he's known all along. David was supposed to succeed as king. And he tells Ishbosheth, I'm switching sides. You've accused me of this. I am just so angry. I'm switching sides. And if we want to dissect it a little bit, Ishbosheth still has the title of king. if he chooses, if he can prove this thing that Abner has done, he could possibly get some guards together and have Abner taken prisoner, maybe even killed. Abner senses, I think, that his days of being the power behind the throne, one way or another, are over. And so he's switching sides, he says, because he's angry, but he's switching sides because he has to. And so he says, I'm going to go deliver this whole kingdom to David, like God said. He's suddenly grown a conscience. And it says that Ishbosheth is so afraid of him that he can't say another word. He knows he's not really the king. He knows that Abner's, so.
So now we're going to Abner changing sides. And so we're on 2 Samuel 3, verses 12 through 21. Then Abner sent messengers in his place to say to David, "To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and surely my hand will be with you to bring all of Israel over to you." "Good," replied David, "I will make a covenant with you, but there's one thing I require of you. Do not appear before me unless you bring Saul's daughter, Michal, when you come to see me." Then David sent messengers to say to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, "Give me back my wife, Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 Philistine foreskins." So Ishbosheth sent and took Michal from her husband, Paltiel, son of Lash. Her husband followed her weeping all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go back." So he returned home. Now Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "In the past you sought David as your king. Now take action, because the Lord has said to David, 'Through my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and of all their enemies.'" Abner also spoke to the Benjaminites and went to Hebron to tell David all that seemed good to Israel and to the whole house of Benjamin. When Abner and 20 of his men came to David at Hebron, David held a feast for them. When Abner said to David, "Let me go at once, and I will gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may rule over all that your hearts desire." So David dismissed Abner, and he went in peace.
So we see a lot of politics going on. Abner makes good on his threat. He sends messengers to David and says, I can deliver these other 10 tribes to you. I can deliver the whole thing. If you'll make a covenant, if you'll agree to take care of me, I can do this for you. And David says, good. He says, I'll make a covenant with you, but under one condition. He says that you're going to send back Michal, who was Saul's daughter. There's a lot of politics going on. Remember, he was married to Saul's daughter, and then he has to run. And Saul, out of spite, sort of, I guess, annuls the marriage. Doesn't really work, but he did. And he gave her to another man as his wife. And he says, I want Michal back. This is politics. We've just read that he's had, 6 sons in 6 years?
7.5 years.
In 7.5 years. He's got plenty of wives and plenty of sons. But this is Saul's daughter. And politically, it cements this alliance because the 10 tribes up north followed Saul. Judah sort of went its own way. So this is a political move.
It's not about love.
It really is not. What's love got to do with it? And he says, there's a phrase in here I love. If you go to the original, he tells him, you won't see my face again unless you send Michal to me. You won't even have an opportunity to come in front of me unless you do this thing. And then what we see, and it's often overlooked, is after he tells Abner this, you're going to send Michal to me, then he personally sends messengers to Ishbosheth and says, I want my wife. And the thing you have to remember is Ishbosheth, who's the king up north, right? Saul's son. Michal is Saul's daughter. So these are brother and sister. And he sends this word to this figurehead king, and he says, you send me my sister back and do it now.
Your sister
Or
back.
your sister back and do it now. Now he's already told Abner to do this. And maybe it's not important, but it kind of is, because this part's political. He's establishing dominance. He's told the king of the north, do this thing and do it now. But there's also an understanding that if you give an order to another king and he does it, that king sort of becomes subservient. He has acquiesced to the fact that he's not powerful enough to resist you. And it sets up this sort of almost a vassal relationship. And that becomes important to what comes next. And then we find this next scene where they're sending Michal over to David, and her current husband is following along behind, weeping. And I don't know whether it's pathetic or, it's wrong, but he's weeping. He's following along behind. And Abner, they come across Abner, and Abner tells the husband, go home. And he does. Nobody, people are afraid of Abner. There are things you're supposed to understand from this, and one that Abner is a powerful guy. And Abner tells him, shut up, stop crying, go home, and he does.
And the other thing you need to remember on this is that David made an agreement with Saul early on, that last time Saul and he met, saying, I know you're going to win. I know you're going to be king eventually. Promise me one thing. Promise me you will take care of my family. And so, I think that Ishbosheth knows that his time is up as this figurehead king, and he's doing what needs to be done. And he believes that David won't kill him. Well,
with good reason. David's given his word. So, and that's all part of the setup. That's a very good point. David has given his word that he won't kill off Saul's line. It says that Abner conferred with the elders of Israel. And this is where that word gets you. Yes, sir.
Before you go there, this husband.
Yes. Yes.
Crying.
Yes.
Is there any implication of religious commitment to the Almighty as opposed to the law? I am the king that can make marriages. Now we're playing politics that doesn't do with upstairs.
Yeah, it's just absolutely wrong. I mean, it's what gets these people in trouble. We don't see it spelled out all the time, but we often see it in retrospect that they get in trouble, they get punished. And we've heard that the reason is because you did this and this. This thing that Saul did, and remember what Saul was. Saul got completely crazy before the end. But he goes to kill David, who's married to his own daughter, and David has to run. And Saul just says, here, I'm gonna give this daughter to, she's married to David. And so, yeah, there is absolutely an understanding that David is still her husband. It's not just the law. It should not have been done. It shouldn't have happened. But there's also good indication that what David's most concerned about is the political implications.
Well, and also, this returns him as the legitimate son-in-law of Saul.
Yes, it returns him as the legitimate son-in-law of Saul. And that's sort of when he could have sent word to Ishbosheth and said, look, this is my wife. God's law. I mean, you can't do this. But he negotiates first with Abner. And this is a negotiation about power, about uniting the North and the South. And he says, yeah, I'll make a deal with you, but only if you send Saul's daughter back to me. This is part of the power negotiation. And I think that's what we're supposed to get from it. But let me go ahead, because it says that then Abner goes and begins to talk with the leaders of the 10 northern tribes. And he tells them, in the past, you wanted David as your king. You did. You know you did. Now you accepted Ishbosheth, but you know there was grumbling going on. You know you guys, David was so successful in battle. And David was even-handed where Saul was a little wild and crazy. He says, you know, you guys always wanted David. Now's your chance. I want you to, let's see if I can, he says, Abner confirmed with the elders, in the past you wanted David as your king. Now take action, because the Lord has said to David, through my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and all their enemies. So again, suddenly Abner's grown a conscience. Suddenly Abner tells them, you know, you really wanted David to be your king. You know that. And now you got a chance to take action because God has said David's the one. Why didn't he do this before now? You know, again, this is the politics of power.
So we get to the next murder, or the next killing rather. Joab, yes.
Told myself I was the next question, but I'm kind of confused here. He consulted the elders.
Yes.
Any priest involved in those elders? I mean, who are these elders? If they're priests, we've got really significant questions.
There don't appear to be any priests involved. The elders, the tribal elders, we're not told, but we see that Saul sort of
He killed all the priests.
killed a whole bunch and sort of dispensed with a lot more of it. This is political power, and the elders are the you know, the ones that are strongest within the tribes.
So we go to Joab killing Abner. So we start at verse 22. Just then David's soldiers and Joab returned from a raid, bringing with them a great plunder. But Abner was not with David in Hebron because David had sent him on his way in peace. When Joab and all his troops arrived, he was informed. Abner, son of Ner, came to see the king, who sent him on his way in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you dismiss him? Now he's getting away. Surely you realize that Abner, son of Ner, came to deceive you and to track your movements and all that you are doing." So as soon as Joab had left David, he sent messengers after Abner, who brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David was unaware of it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab pulled him aside into the gateway as if to speak to him privately. And there Joab stabbed him in the stomach. So Abner died on account of the blood of Joab's brother, Asahel. Afterwards, David heard about this and said, "I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May it whirl over the heads of Joab and the entire house of his father. And may the house of Joab never be without one having a discharge or skin disease, or one who leans on a staff, or falls by the sword, or lacks food." Joab and his brother Asahel murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Then David ordered Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn before Abner."
Let's pause for a minute and talk about
Okay.
the killing part.
Okay.
So we're told 3 times that David sent Abner on his way in peace. Abner came in person after they first make contact. Abner comes in person to negotiate this truce. And David throws a feast for him, and they have the discussion, and it says that David sent him away in peace. And it winds up saying it 3 different times. And the implication, the idea, the understanding is that David and Abner have an agreement.
And it's
They're-
not a wartime.
They're no longer at war. He sent him away in peace. And Joab comes in. Joab, remember, is David's warlord. And it says he comes in with a lot of plunder. They've gone out on a raid and they've come back very successful. And the moment he gets to town, the little voices say, "You know, Abner was just here, and Abner's your enemy, and David was talking to him, and David sent him away in peace." Joab is livid. he still blames him for killing Abner for killing his brother Asahel. And he goes in to see David. And it's a little bit lost in the translation, but the way he talks to David is very, very disrespectful, to the point that if you talk to your king like that, you could get locked up. I mean, this is serious business. And he says, what are you thinking? You had him here and you let him go. First of all, you know he's only here to look things over and figure out how he can come attack you. And that's saying the king is too stupid to understand what's really going on. Do you not get it? Are you stupid? He was here to look in on you militarily. He doesn't really want a truce. But the other thing that is very much implied with this, remember, Abner has been this sort of warlord for Saul, and he's been extremely successful. He was with Saul. And if the north and south reach a truce, Abner's the most experienced military leader. There's a good chance Joab gets replaced. So there's several levels of things going on here. And he says this to David, and we don't have any reference to a response. So David didn't say, "Oh, you're right." You know, we don't see that. Joab on his own goes out and sends out messengers, go catch Abner before he gets too far away, and tell him to come back. There's something important to talk about. And they do, because it says Abner was not too far away, this well he's at. And they get him to come back, and I'm sure he thinks that David has summoned him, that there's some additional business. Joab waits for him at the gate and says, "Hey, come over here. I got something to talk to you about. Let's go over here by the gate, away from everybody else. I need to talk to you about something." And while he's got him, he stabs him in the stomach and kills him.
And he doesn't let him go into the city.
There is also a belief that because Hebron is one of these cities of refuge, if he lets Abner get all the way into the city, he can't touch him. But he catches him at the gate, so he's not actually in the city of refuge. Again, always a lot of this, when it gets this political, there's a lot going on. But he just kills him. And it says that Abner was killed because of the blood of Asahel. And people spend this amazing amount of time trying to figure out, was that murder? And was when Abner killed Asahel, was that okay? And that's what I was talking about earlier. These things keep coming up. There are two different words used. There are two different Hebrew words used. That Abner was killed because Asahel was killed, two different words. And I thought there's got to be a clue in here. One of them is permitted and one of them is not. And it turns out it's just not that way. It's revenge. There's no doubt about it. And this has been, 7 years since his brother was killed?
So it was not in the heat of battle. And they're letting us know that this was not in the heat of battle. It was a time of peace. It was, but they also say they're like setting it up. So the narrator's setting it up so it is in the gray area, because Abner did kill his brother, but he was outside the city of protection. But, Joab did it like.
It was because of the blood of his brother. And that's the reason we're going to all this trouble. The reason I'm spending so much time on it is because we tend to cling to the law. We want to look at things, and the Jews had a history of it, of looking for loopholes in the law. And the fact is, what Joab does is a gray area. As a kinsman, is he the Goel Hadam? That's the position he takes on himself. I'm the avenger of blood. And if this goes to a trial under Jewish law, it's not cut and dried. It may seem like it should be, but it's not. And I mention all that, we mention all that because what we see is David doesn't punish him. David doesn't say, I mean, this guy has misrepresented. He's brought the guy back under false pretenses. He met him at the gate, clearly with the intention of killing him. And David doesn't punish him.
And remember, this is David's nephew too. This is David's nephew. Joab is David's nephew. It's the thought that Joab had been with him for years, protecting him as part of those 600 men, right? And so it's complicated. So let's see what David does.
My conspiracy theory tells me that David knew exactly what he was doing. He sent the guy out in peace. He knew that Joab was going to be beat off. And he gets insulted, but he's really not. I think it's all engineered by David.
We'll wait and see. That's coming up. All right, because it tells us.
So then David ordered Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes, put on your sackcloth, and mourn before Abner. And King David himself walked behind the funeral bier. When they buried Abner in Hebron, the king wept out loud at Abner's tomb, and all the people wept. And the king sang the lament for Abner. Should Abner die the death of a fool? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As a man falls before the wicked, so also you fell. And all the people wept over him even more. Then all the people came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, may God punish me, and ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. All the people took note and were pleased. In fact, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people and all Israel were convinced that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his servants, do you not realize that a great prince has fallen today in Israel? And I am weak this day, though anointed as king. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too fierce for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil.
If you want to do it purely politically, Abner had the ability to deliver the 10 northern tribes. He had exactly what David wanted. The idea of uniting the whole kingdom, Abner had the ability to deliver it. So if you want to play it politically, he needed Abner. Having him killed would have been, or letting him be killed wouldn't be a bad thing. A lot of people think that it's no coincidence that this meeting took place while Joab was out in the field on a raid. Joab comes back and he's threatened. But the idea, there were going to be people that would be suspicious that David had a part in Abner's killing. But David shows, sincere remorse, and he makes this lament. Why should Abner have died the death of a fool? He said, your hands weren't bound, your feet weren't shackled, fettered. And what that means is you weren't a prisoner, you'd done nothing wrong, and yet you were killed by evil men. And do you not realize what a prince of Israel has been killed this day? So if he was faking it, he made a good show of it.
Well, and as it turned out, like you said, he had every political reason, and we'll talk about the other reason. He had every political reason to keep Abner. And what we see in the next couple of chapters, it now takes another 5 years to unite the kingdom, and Abner could have helped him do it a lot quicker. And so it really did cost David probably 5 years to unite the kingdom as one under Israel, right?
Yep. The last thing that I want you to see in verse 38, 39. Then the king said to his servants, do you not realize that a great prince has fallen today in Israel? And then this last bit, and he says, and I am weak this day, though anointed king, and these men, these sons of Zeruiah, are too fierce for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil. So what he's saying is, I'm weak. These guys have been able to go out and kill this man. And even though I'm anointed king, I don't have the power to stop them. Maybe it's political, but maybe he's being serious, because if he kills Joab, if he punishes him, he's likely to fragment the kingdom even more. This thing is going to break down. David is certainly wise here, because these are powerful men. And so he says, even though I'm technically king, he says, I'm weak this day. And these men, these sons of Zeruiah, they're too rough for me. They are too headstrong for me. And so he's making a show of them in front of everybody. He's calling them out. He's not punishing Joab, but he's calling him out. He's already cursed him and said, your house is going to have this sort of curse over you. But he says, what you guys did was wrong, but I'm powerless against you. And so finally he says, may God give you the vengeance that you deserve. May God give you the punishment. It is at the very least wise. I think at this point, this is consistent though with David. David has been, he's been wise, but he has continued to follow God. There's a certain amount of it that is probably the politics of power, and maybe he's just being, a realist. But I think he means at this point, I think he means what he says. And the thing that's important is all the people are convinced. It says they're pleased with what he did. In fact, they're pleased with everything that David does.
So now we're on to the third killing. Yeah. Yes.
So where are Joab and his brother at this stage? Are they fleeing or-
No, they are in Hebron with, and he makes them tear their clothes and he makes them go to the funeral.
He does. He forces them to mourn for this person that they've blamed for their brother's death. And I don't want to belabor this. Maybe I'll do another one midweek this week for people who, I don't want to bore people. But this is a very complicated, critical time. And if it goes to the judges, there is still this element of blood avenging that Joab could get off. I mean, if David attempts to punish him, Joab, so what he does is he calls them out publicly. He calls them evil men in this lament, but he makes everybody tear their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn. They're right there in it. And so to an extent, he sort of, I don't want to say humiliates, but he certainly calls them out and forces them to be there and take it.
Now when Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all of Israel was dismayed. Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding parties. One was named Baanah and the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon of Beerothite of the tribe of Benjamin. Beeroth is considered part of Benjamin because the Beerothites fled to Gittim and had lived there as foreigners to this day. And Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but she was hurrying to escape. He fell and became lame. His name was, how do you say it?
Mephibosheth.
And so that one line there, you just have to remember because it comes up later. So Jonathan had a son, and it just sort of stick it in the middle of the story. Now Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out and arrived at the house of Ishbosheth in the heat of the day, while the king was taking his midday nap. They entered the interior of the house as if to get some wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah slipped away. They had entered the house while Ishbosheth was lying on his bed, and having stabbed and killed him, they beheaded him, took his head, and traveled all night by the way of Arabah. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy who sought your life. Today the Lord has granted vengeance to my lord, the king, against Saul and his offspring." But David answered Rechab and his brothers Baanah, the son of Rimmon of Beerothite, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress. When someone told me, look, Saul is dead, and thought he was a bearer of good news, I seized him and I put him to death in Ziklag. That was his reward for his news. How much more when wicked men kill a righteous man in his own house, on his own bed, shall I not require his blood for your hands and remove you from the earth? David commanded his young men, and they killed Rechab and Benah. They cut off their hands and feet and hung their bodies by the pool of Hebron. So they took the head of Ishabeth and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron.
Okay, we don't have long. I'll try. Yeah, lots of killing going on, huh? Yeah.
That's right.
So there's a couple of things here. One I want to mention is that these two guys, last week I talked about Gerim, these protected foreigners living amongst the Jews. These two guys are Gerim. They're Beerothites. They're people who have taken up with Israel over the years.
But they're not Jews.
But they're not Jews. They're just living. And to give you an idea about how protected these foreigners were, these two are leaders of raiding parties. They are given, positions of authority and trust. And they recognize now that Abner is gone, Ishbosheth can't be king. He's a weak man. And they come in, pretend like they're here for some wheat, sneak into his room, kill him and behead him, because they're going to go curry favor with David. Because they recognize Ishbosheth is king of the north. If we remove the king of the north, everything is free and clear for you, and he'll reward us. And that the idea of them being outsiders, once again, probably figures into it. They go down, they show this to David. Look what we did. We removed your political rival. And of course, David says, this other guy did this.
The Amalekite.
The Amalekite, I had him killed. David was trying to kill me. He came in with that news. I had him killed. That was his reward. What do you think I'm going to do to you for going and killing an honest man? And in truth, Ishbosheth had every reason to believe that he'd be protected. There was going to be a transfer of power, but Ishbosheth, David had made a vow, and then they had gone through that little dance I told you about earlier. Ishbosheth was not a threat. And these two guys going in and killing him, David has a right to be livid about it. Cutting off the hands and that kind of stuff, they're prohibited by Jewish law. That they're not supposed to do. But is there anything else that you want to get to on this?
No, we're at time.
Once again, though, the scholars, the word for when these two guys kill Ishbosheth is muth, M-U-T-H, muth. And that same word gets used way back there when Abner kills Asahel in the heat of battle. The same word. So I can't make heads or tails of it. All I can tell you is I don't think we should be killing each other. I'm pretty sure this is not God's plan. And I think that the law, the big message I want to get across is the law fails. This Mosaic law gives us a guideline, but it's not the ultimate expression of God's will, because I think if we were not broken, we wouldn't have the wars, we wouldn't have the avengers of blood, because the first killing never would have happened. And the whole idea of the law, and that's why when Jesus comes later and says, I didn't come to get rid of the law, I came to fulfill the law. And he demonstrated this idea of laying down his life. It's the exact opposite of the law. He said, I came to fulfill it. The law, the law fails us. And it's an important connection. Hopefully we'll have a chance to get to more of that in upcoming weeks. Let's say a quick word of prayer. God, we always are thankful for your words. Sometimes I despair at my inability to completely understand them. I try. We want to know your will for us. And what I want to ask for today is the help, the understanding to make the distinction between the law and the hesed, the love, the kindness that you show us, and the fact that we rely on the law rather than on hesed. Give us eyes to see that. Give us a heart to understand it as we deal with the people, the other people in the world around us. Amen.
Amen. Okay, I'm going to see if I can unrecord. Where do I do that? What does it say? Oh, under more? No, the end ends, no, that ends the call. More, stop recording. There you go.